Well, I've lived in Taiwan for 3 years, and I should have learned more Mandarin than I have. This is why I wrote a translator, but I hope some of you will pick up my British English.
因为我们的那个会长他已经来台湾做了3年，可是他还没有学会中文，所以今天来帮大家做一个简单的翻译。然后他的那个中文可稍微带一点那个英国的口音，然后希望大家能听得懂。
Quick introduction of what I do and where I work. So I've been in Taiwan for 3 years. We've moved here with my family. I work as the CEO for the Swedish Chamber of Commerce here in Taipei. So essentially, I'll get into what we do just briefly before I get into my speech. I also have an unhealthy interest in retro computers, very old computers from the early 1980s.
好，所以这是我们刚才有介绍过是商会的会长，然后呢，我们主要的工作在台湾是推广一些跟瑞典有关的文化，然后让大家更了解瑞典人的思维跟经营方式。然后他自己对一些比较老旧的电脑感兴趣，然后自己在私下也会做一些研究跟收藏。
So the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, there are a couple of chambers of commerce in Taiwan. The Swedish is one of them, American Chamber of Commerce, British Chamber of Commerce. And what we do, it's a non-profit, non-government organization where we have member companies that we work together with, such as Hexagon. So Hexagon is a member of our chamber. So we assist our members with bringing Sweden into the Swedish companies in Taiwan, because typically there are not many Swedish employees. So how do you bring Swedish values, Swedish leadership, Swedish culture into Swedish companies in Taiwan? That's what we work with.
首先呢，瑞典商会是一个非营利组织。那目前我们大概有40-50个瑞典公司商营的会员，然后其中 Hexagon 就是我们的会员之一。然后我们主要的工作就是帮忙这些公司传递一些瑞典的价值观，然后也努力的让瑞典那边的人可以在台湾工作，然后更了解台湾的商业跟文化。
I've actually underlined the word universities here because we do a lot of work with student exchange, trying to bring Taiwanese university students and also high school students to Sweden to study, and to bring Swedish students into Taiwan to discover the fantastic Taiwan, the opportunities here, because it's about marrying the two countries together and closer to each other. So a lot of work around student education exchange.
那在 PPT 底下可以看到他把大学画了一个底线，然后他把它滚掉。那当然我们很多工作是做学生方面交流，然后把台湾的学生带到瑞典，从大学然后高中也有，然后让瑞典的学生也来台湾做交换，让彼此可以更了解对方的文化。
So this is a sample of some of our member companies, and of course you'll see Hexagon in the middle there. Very proud to have Hexagon as a member of the chamber. So I'm pretty sure some of you have most likely worked with some of these brands before. Everyone knows IKEA and Ericsson, Scania, Volvo, etc. So as a user of Hexagon and MSC Software, you most likely have worked with at least, I'd say, a handful of these companies in helping them design their products and test their products. Similarly.
那这一页就是我们现在有的一些会员公司，然后在中间我们可以看到 Hexagon， 那 Hexagon 也是比较最近加入我们商会，然后其他这些公司，因为就是产业的关系，就是都有互相配合，然后做合作，然后相信你们大家也有听过，或是帮这些公司做过一些设计或是工程类的工作。
This is where my sales pitch about the chamber stops, and I get into a couple of slides on the Swedish innovation strategy and Sweden's region's journey from a pretty poor agricultural society into one of the most innovative countries in the world.
那现在开始，他要分享一下瑞典的创新之路。那瑞典是从一个非常贫穷的农业国家，然后到今天变成一个很创新的国家，然后算世界上就是很前面，就是大家看齐的一个国家。
So I'll go through 7 specific items which I believe has made Sweden's journey possible from a very poor agricultural society, as I said, to the second most developed country in the world for 15, 20 years running. So I've actually translated some of this, and I hope you understand the translation unless you speak English.
那他现在要分享，他觉得瑞典可以从农业国发展成这么创新国家7个大众嘛。然后他的 PPT， 他说他是用 Google Translate 做的，所以希望你们可以看得到。
My bad. So 7 items or 7 key factors which has affected us and actually led to where we are today with Sweden. So in 1842, schools was made compulsory, mandatory. If you were a kid in Sweden in 1842, you had to go to school. The school system in Sweden is quite different to what I've experienced in Taiwan. I have 3 kids, younger, bigger, 30. And their experience of school here is quite different because schools in Sweden, you are encouraged to question, to challenge, to debate, to really drill into things and question the teacher, question the system. This can be quite daunting if you're a teacher, of course, but it fosters kids who grow up to question things and really try and discover.
那有一个就是第一个重点就是瑞典从1842年以来就推行义务教育，所以所有的小朋友都一定要去上学这样。然后Fredrik 他自己有3个小孩在瑞典念过书，然后现在搬来台湾，然后他认为那个台湾跟瑞典的教育方式相差非常大。在瑞典呢，就是小朋友从小会被鼓励要多问问题，然后就是多去思考一些就是东西。可是，在台湾，就他认为好像比较台湾学生可能就只接受知识，然后比较没有那个发挥的空间。
It's by no means a criticism to the Taiwanese educational system, but it's quite different. That's what I want to talk about. 92% of Swedes are fluent in English. So when you went into your own career, starting programming, coding, designing, systems engineering, you did not probably rely only on Mandarin textbooks. You went online. You had to learn English to learn something new and to get sort of a broader perspective. So English is a very important key factor here. The other one is that higher education, university studies, is heavily subsidized in Sweden. So I would probably estimate about 40 to 50% of Swedes go on to, 60% go on to higher education once they're done with high school.
那就是在瑞典有大概92%的人都是会说英文的。那我们认为就是英文是一个非常重要的语言，因为你不管在学习上面都会用到，比如说学 programming 或 coding， 很多知识不是光中文都可以就是学习到。然后另外那个在瑞典的高等教育都是有接受到补贴，然后小朋友就是从好像高中跟大学都会有一些补助，然后鼓励他们追求更高的学业。
So the second item is informal networks. So Swedish workplaces is a very flat organization. Of course, there is the formal hierarchy of managers, and every manager has a manager, etc. But it's a very open workplace where you can talk to essentially anyone about problems or issues or challenge questions, etc. So I think that this is a result of our educational system where people, I should almost say, refuse to fit in. So it's a very open workplace, a very open society where, of course, you respect the elderly, you respect your manager, but you don't have a problem questioning or talking to your manager, even your upline manager.
那第二个重点，他认为就是在瑞典的公司，他们有一个有点非正式的社交网络。那就是虽然就是也有分阶级，也有经理、总经理这样，可是大家的那个地位是差不多的。然后他觉得这个跟他们从小接受到教育也有关系，就是不管遇到什么问题，或是有什么疑问都要把它问这样，所以也让就是在工作上大家比较能够交流，然后分享一些自己的想法。
The other item is putting user first. So regardless of how advanced and cool things you design, if you did not consider usability or user interface, or is this actually something that can be used without much hazard? You're not going to succeed. So we'll look at a couple of Swedish innovations later on, and you'll see that some of them are so simple. Why didn't I think of that? But usability and putting user first is an absolute key. So let me take one example, music streaming. We've had music streaming for about 25 years, actually. It was not until Spotify, the Swedish invention, sort of made it more accessible that users really jumped on it.
那第三个重点就是他认为瑞典企业都是会把用户放在第一位，因为如果没有用户来使用东西的话，就是就算东西做得再好也不成立。那刚才有几个例子，就是 Spotify 就是听音乐的那个频道，就是虽然那个功能很简单，然后以前都有很多就是可以听音乐的平台，但是它把它综合起来，让我们就是更方便的可以使用。
So the third item is that we have several innovation programs in schools in Sweden, and this is by no means you have this in Taiwan, you have it in US, you have it almost everywhere. But I think so. This is a key factor in Sweden, but it's by no means unique for Sweden. But it starts around when kids go to school around 7 years of age, and the programs are not governed by political committees, or they're governed by scientists and researchers who coach and structure the programs, which I think is an important difference to many other countries.
另外一个重点就是他认为在瑞典有很多学校都有一些创新的活动给学生参与，然后虽然在很多国家都也有类似的活动，但是在那边他们比较注重是给就是研究人员或是科学家来指导这些活动，而不是参展任何就是政治方面的。
So the fifth item is R&D spend. So Sweden is one of the top countries. I actually tried to highlight it here in terms of the percentage of the GDP that we spend on R&D. We've done this for the past 25 years. So this is a huge factor. You have countries who invest, 5-6 times more on arms, military spending. But unless you invest in the future in R&D, you won't get anywhere. And this goes not only for countries, but of course also for companies. But some of the most successful companies typically invest 15-20% of their revenue or their profits into R&D, because they know in order to survive and stay ahead, you need to invest.
那另外一个重点就是瑞典的研究支出比例很高，然后在左下面图上面圈起来，我们可以看到，就是跟其他国家比，瑞典算是就支出最多的国家之一。然后其他国家就是可能会用更多的金钱投入在那个军火，就是其他方面。然后他认为，就是一个成功的公司必须投入更多的研发支出在这方面。然后很多比较成功的公司都投入更高，就是10%甚至15%的经费都在研发。
The other item is at the bottom there. The government owned basically railways. They owned most of the infrastructure. Telecom was owned by the government. Airways was owned by the government. And in the early 1980s, they started to deregulate this and privatize. And when you privatize something as large as, the single telecom company in Sweden, you start to get people willing to invest in that market because there's no longer a monopoly. So you have a lot of startups focusing on providing cool new features in telecom, which was not available before because you had a monopoly and someone, a big fat cat, earning all the money. But now you've made room for smarter people to come into the market for airways, railway, infrastructure, telecom, etc.
那在更早之前，瑞典的一些公共设施或是电讯产业都是由政府管理的。但在1980之后，就是政府慢慢释放这些，然后让就是一般的企业也可以进行就是投资或是创新，然后再鼓励更多人愿意投入经费，然后去做创新。
And now we come to the interesting part. So I'm at a software user conference, and I debated with myself, should I talk about software piracy, hacking, etc.? We've all come across this. But let me give you 4 important separate leaps in Sweden that essentially made the new IT generation in Sweden.
那他Fredrik刚说他考虑了很久，要不要讨论一些什么骇客什么技术那些问题，但是他觉得他今天就是主要跟大家解释4个重点。那他认为这4个重点就是让瑞典能够在技术方面更成熟的关键。
So the first one, in the beginning I said I have an unhealthy interest in retro computers from the early 1980s because these are the ones, and you'll see my favorite here, the Commodore 64. This is what built the IT generation in Sweden. You have, of course, the Sinclair Spectrum with the rubber buttons, etc. But this was it. Everyone had this. So in Sweden, you have sort of a coverage of every 4th home in the beginning, mid-1980s, they had a microcomputer where the kids, typically the parents did not use it, but the kids started to explore.
那第一个可以看到的就是这个64，然后这是他自己本人最喜欢的一台电脑。那在早期1980年代的时候，大概每3到4户人家都会有一台，然后这也给小朋友就是机会去探索，然后发展就是电脑的运用。
Then in 1988, we started to connect all the Swedish universities through an X25 network. Now, X25 is it's an old standard, it's not very useful, but we started to connect the universities. And when you were a university student discovering that there's something outside the walls, you started to use something, I don't know how many of you know, Gopher, which was essentially the first search tool where you search this network, you could find other essays, work, research work, etc. So this opened up a new world. You were no longer tied to NTU or NTNU. You had access to everything in the university network in Sweden.
那在1988年的时候，就是被推出 Hexagon， 然后让所有的大学生能够互相做联系。然后他刚刚有提例是 Gopher 的，有人有听过吗？他说是最早的一个网络搜寻引擎，然后在上面可以查到一些论文或者是一些就是别人的工作，然后让大家有机会可以分享他们的东西，然后这也让就是大家更，因为在大学的时候大家都是比较好奇心的，就是愿意可以让他们做研究，然后更怎么说更有机会就是做创新或是就是发展这块。
So the third one is the home computer reform, where the government said that we should subsidize PCs, the Windows PCs, for every home in Sweden. So they were heavily subsidized, they were tax-free, which essentially then again meant that almost every home in Sweden had a PC at a certain age where people could start to explore and use the early services of the internet. So this was also a way of bringing people on board the IT train.
因为另外一个重点就是在1998年的时候，瑞典政府为了鼓励大家就是去买电脑，就是电脑这些商品都是免税的，所以就是几乎每户人家都会有一台电脑，然后这也给大家机会就是更了解这个产业。 跟那个电脑。
And the last item is then, as I said, hacking VBS systems. You know, the early websites on dial-ups where you could exchange software, IDS, text, etc. So VBSs, they were a big thing in Sweden as well. I mentioned software piracy. It's a touchy subject, but fact is that the young generation in the 80s and 90s in Sweden, they learned a lot. They were so curious and they learned by trying to do things, cracking software, swapping, etc. And I know it's a bad word. We are at a software user conference, but it's an important part of that young generation exploring and learning by doing.
那另外他有强调一个比较敏感的话题，就是做黑客或是 BBS 看一些盗版的软件。那虽然就是我们现在在一个正规的就是软体应用公司，但他认为就是因为有这些东西，让大家对电脑或是对一些程式感到好奇，然后会更愿意花时间去做研究，然后这也让就是大家更了解就是科技上的一些。
And the last item is actually it's more important than you would think. Sweden is very cold, very dark. And if you spend a lot of time indoors, you know, not playing soccer, not climbing trees, climbing mountains, etc., at some point you will come up with fantastic ideas and you will have time to explore. So beginning of January, the sun is up for 4 minutes.
那另外一个他觉得非常重要的，就是在瑞典大家都知道有永夜，就是到冬天的时候，就是会有长期的黑暗，然后又非常的冷，所以大家不是很难尝试一些户外运动。然后甚至在1月的时候，就是每天太阳升起都只有4分钟。那这也激发大家就是可以有更多创造力，因为你们都是关在一起。
Exactly. And I kid you not, it's really, really cold. So these are examples of some of the older Swedish inventions, which most of you use today. I mean, Tetra Pak. If you look at any juice box or tea box in Taiwan, it says Tetra Pak. You've got the logo up there, Swedish company. This is actually my great-grandfather invented this. So 60, 70 years ago, when you were making a phone call, you lift the phone, and there would be someone on the other end asking, who do you want to speak to? And they moved a connector or a cable, saying, oh, you want to speak to that person? Boom. Well, what he did, he invented a machine that actually made it possible for you to dial a number and connect to that person directly, essentially making several people workless. But that's beside the point. Safety matches, you know, before they came along, you could light it on anything. You know, anything hard, you could light a match. Safety matches, make sure you have to use this. Walking chair, adjustable wrench, pacemaker, 3-way car belt, seat belt. So previously you only had a seat belt that went this way. Volvo launched this. Now it's standard everywhere. AIS. Well, mainly used for bolting and airplane identification. So you're able to see the identification of a boat or an airplane. It sort of transmits. The GPS is also a Swedish innovation. The zipper, quite useful. Dynamite, of course, invented by Nobel, who then went on to found the Nobel Prize. Low-sec for those long work hours where you need to get your stomach in order. So just a couple of examples of stuff that some of you use daily. Yeah. So these are some of the more recent Swedish digital innovations. Most of you know Minecraft, or if you have kids, they certainly know Minecraft. Bluetooth is also originally a Swedish invention. Spotify, Candy Crush, every grandmother's favorite game. Skype, also originally one of the co-founders or co-inventors. We played Battlefield in here. Do we have any Battlefield players? Okay. So DICE is a Swedish software studio. I also mentioned Pirate Bay. Pirate Bay is not very, most of you know about Pirate Bay, but again, it was founded by guys who started their career using microcomputers at home, exploring, curiosity, learning by doing, etc. It's not a good thing per se, but the technology then went on to sort of promote torrents. I don't get to translate. Again, back to the Commodore 64. Just one more minute, Jeffrey. So this is one of the microcomputers. 8 megahertz, 64 kilobits, very, very limited. Originally, no way to get online. So this was launched in 1984. And to me, this is probably one of the most key items because in these pictures, you see people from the early 80s and mid 80s. One of them, I won't point out who, founded Spotify. He went on to found Spotify, and he says himself that it was his early days with microcomputers, learning by doing, that made him think differently. We also have Notch in one of these pictures. He went on to find Mojang, and then went on to do Minecraft, etc. So again, learning by doing, exploring, and learning by yourself makes you think differently out of the box. So I think this was actually the last slide. Yes, this year. Thank you very much.